you are here in the country and have just on day 89 of this war been to Kfar Aza in the south, one of the parts of southern Israel hardest hit by the Hamas terror rampage. Your thoughts, your perspective?
First of all, nothing can prepare you for what I saw. You could read about it, you could watch the videos, you could watch images on television. It's absolutely horrific. But of course I went there to support Israel, but I brought a Palestinian with me. One of the reasons I brought him is that there are so many lies going around the world. In the Arab world, in America, on the left, people are saying it didn't happen. October 7th didn't happen. Israel's exaggerating. You had the story in the New York Times about the sexual assault. I did my first TikTok video. It's just encouraging people to read the New York Times article. TikTok took it down, right? There's too much lying going around. So I wanted people to hear from this Palestinian what he thought about it. I'm going to release a video in the coming days, but it's really important. You got to keep people going there. You got to keep influencers going, government officials, and ordinary people so they can understand the atrocities that happen there.
Give us your sense, though, of what it was like to be there. You say nothing could prepare you. What stood out for you, your emotions?
You know, you walk into the homes and you see the utter destruction. You see there's no more blood. They've cleaned everything up, but you just I noticed the plants. Today happened to be a beautiful spring day. I plant with my kids. We're gardening. You see the beauty, the serenity of the place, and you just can't even fathom how somebody could come and do that to ordinary people, to civilians, to women, to children, to babies. It's not something that I ever thought I'd see in my lifetime, and certainly not in 2023. We live in the modern world. Who behaves like that? It really brought me back to the Stone Ages.
And Shelley, I want to bring you in on exactly that, because it's staggering to think that 89 days in, despite the evidence, despite the footage, despite the people going to see firsthand what happened, and despite the many, many testimonials and accounts of what happened, that there are reports like the one in the New York Times casting doubt over what actually happened, specifically when it came to the sexual assaults on women and girls on that day.
I completely agree, and I must say, you know, before the war, I was a women's rights advocate, right? I would talk about it all the time, and since this horrible war occurred, since October 7th, I've been fighting women's rights organizations around the world because they're so silent. They don't speak up. They don't speak on behalf of the women who were sexually assaulted, who were raped, who were amputated, who really suffered horrific crimes against humanity. And I must say, I spoke today at the Knesset about the article in the New York Times, and I encourage everybody to read this article. I must say, it took me 3 days to read the whole article because it was so graphic and the evidence was so horrific. I had to stop and go back to the article and read it because it was too much for me. And I spoke about it today at the Knesset because, you know, one of the most horrific things that I felt was the story about the woman in the black dress, which the whole world is speaking about, because there was a video that was on social media. And this young woman who was murdered, and her husband was murdered as well, and they left 2 little children, orphans, and she was raped. And nobody asked her permission to talk about the fact that she was raped. Usually when women are sexually assaulted, it takes years until they can talk about it or even complain about it. And this woman, she wasn't only murdered, she was raped, and nobody asked for her permission to talk about what she went through. It's horrible.
Why, Jason, the silence from women's groups, specifically in the United States? Why the celebrities that are so outspoken in so many other cases around the globe? Why the muted response comparatively from the US at this juncture? Your thoughts?
Well, they're hypocritical. They hate Jews. But I want to add something to what Shelley said, which is so much of the criticism is just based on a false reality. Some of the criticism is, but there are no testimonies of the rape survivors. It's because they're all dead, right? The few that are still alive are too traumatized to do it. So they're saying because there's no first-hand testimony and everything is second-hand testimony, they're asking for dead people to testify. It's obscene, it's absurd, it's horrific.
The Hamas spokesman Bassem Naim claiming Western media and news agencies are, quote, biased when it comes to what it calls Israeli propaganda, lies about Palestinian resistance, also calling the attacks on the 7th of October glorious. You were on the scene today in Kfar Aza. What kind of response do you have when you hear that kind of rhetoric, when more than 1,200 people were butchered, shot, mutilated, burnt, and that is the response, a glorious day in the eyes of some?
I would say this: ignore them, right? They're haters. They have hate in their heart. You're never going to convince them. But there are a lot of other people who just don't understand, who are being convinced by the wrong people. Those are the people that we have to talk to. Those are the people we have to reach. And when you see this video of the Palestinian, who isn't 100% saying everything I'd love him to say, he's honest, he's emotional about it, he condemned it. Those are the kind of people that we have to touch. People that want a better future, people that are willing to be honest. The crazy people who say crazy things, ignore them. They're terrible people.
Bayam Naim, that same man, to the New York Times, saying that women were recipients of good treatment they had experienced on October the 7th, and that accounts given by hostages released, the female hostages, also reflect that they were well treated. Now, Shirley, you are wearing a necklace. It's in support of the hostages. Still, at this moment, 129 hostages are still being held in Gaza, including women, including children. When you hear that account, the suggestion that these hostages' accounts depicted a favorable situation and treatment inside captivity, what is your response?
Well, it's outrageous, really. These people were taken out of their beds on a Saturday morning, 6:30 in the morning, or from a music festival, and taken into hostage to Gaza. Innocent people, civilians, who were kidnapped and kept in horrible conditions. No medical care. The Red Cross has not visited them. We've all spoken about it everywhere. And horrible conditions, hardly any food, hardly any water. The women that came back from captivity spoke about the horrible conditions they were held, about the fear, how fearful they were from rape, how they were looking at them. Some of them were touching them. And there are testimonies about things that are going on there, and we are very concerned about the women who are still there. Of course, the men, the children, the elderly, everyone. But the women we've already seen that they've used war crimes. They used sexual assault as war weapons. So of course it's outrageous to hear that they were kept in good conditions. These are civilians who should have never been taken into Gaza. And of course I'm wearing the dog tag. I've been wearing it from the day that it was given to me. And we need these 129 people to come back home now, alive.